Okay, and that's the problem. We can use technology without thinking. Universities are here to make people think. And that is what we are trying to do in iLab, to train our youth to develop these skills so that we know how to use these technologies. Data science, artificial intelligence can be used for our advancement. It can be used for improving our nation and our companies and our governments. But it can also be used for unethical purposes, okay? Nowadays, cyber criminals are using artificial intelligence to write scripts and hack into other people's systems, okay? So there is a bad side to that. We also need to address the ethics of all these new technologies. So in iLab, we have been training young people. We have our smart academies. We are trying to work with them before they graduate. We are already involving them in projects with industry, projects that we have in iLab, in research that we are doing. Just a few minutes ago, you saw some of the work that our students had been doing related to data science. I'm also very happy that with us is Ambassador Ryan. Sorry, it's Whitman. Yes, what? I got it. Terrible. Yeah. So in the last few years, and more especially, I think, since the trip of our president to the United States, we have been doing a lot of work with companies like Amazon Web Services, with Google, with Microsoft. Finally, I have seen the people of Apple taking an interest in this region. And we are beginning a collaboration with them to have a center for the development of applications and to train people in Apple technologies. And like this, I could go on through other very important technology companies internationally. So we are trying to understand where the technology is going. We are seeing, okay, now how can we use this technology locally? And we are training people, developing these local skills so that they can bring solutions that will benefit our society. That is the role that as a research lab we have been doing for the last 11 years, and data science is one of our main activities. So thank you very much. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to what we are doing here, and thank you for the big support and for your interest and the work that you are doing in bringing technology and making Kenya to be the hub of the region, and I would say of the continent, in technology. Thank you.
And I will now, it's quite tall. And I will now call upon the Strathmore University Vice Chancellor, Dr. Vincent Ogutu, to make his remarks. Welcome, sir. Tumkaribishe kikenya na kwa makofi.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, our CS for Investments, Trade and Industry, Rebecca Miano, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretary General, Wamkele Mene, the US Ambassador to Kenya, Meg Whitman, our University Council Chair at Strathmore, Mrs. Bernadette Musundi, our iLab Director, Dr. Joseph Sevilla, distinguished guests, it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to this summit, to the pre-summit on data science and artificial intelligence, with a particular focus on how we can use IT to promote trade in Africa. Now, it's interesting that we have the ambassador of the US here. The US is known largely as the paragon of democracy in the world. And I think President Ruto will agree that we have a special brand of democracy here in Kenya, which we're leading Africa in, and it's about democratizing knowledge. So in the continent, I dare say we're number one in democratizing knowledge using technology. So gone are the days when you needed a lot of money to access knowledge and skills. If you have raw talent, and we have an abundance of that in Kenya, then all you need is that little push, that leverage that can give you access to incredible knowledge and opportunities for building your skills. Now, this came home to us in a very special way when COVID happened. 3 weeks before the first case in Africa was reported, Dr. Sevilla walked into our office with the Vice Chancellor at that time, Professor Odhiambo, myself, and we had a meeting in which he told us, this thing that's happening in China and in Europe is going to spread to the whole world. And it's just a matter of time before the whole world, including Kenya, goes on lockdown. We were very skeptical at first because there were only 2 cases in Africa at that time, I think in Egypt and in Nigeria. It seemed so remote and far-fetched. But he insisted, it is coming, it will happen, and what will we do then? Will we shut down? And we said, do you have ideas? He said, we'll have to migrate to an online platform. Thankfully, all our students already have devices. We give them laptops when they join Strathmore. We have the online platforms that we can use, and we were going to get licenses to increase the capacity. What was lacking was training our lecturers in the ability to do that, to teach online and to have our students learn how to learn in real time online. And that is something that iLab Africa and our Deputy of Vice Chancellor, Academic and Student Affairs, Elizabeth Gashenga, is here. They all embarked on this training program, an ambitious training program to just rush everyone through this training. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, the first case was reported to Kenya, and the president put the whole country on lockdown, and we were actually asked that Monday to shut down the university. So we told everyone, go home, be safe, we'll give you time to reach home. The following Monday, classes resumed. So we were the first institution in Kenya to resume educational services. And then part of what we did was to address the limitation that we had. We had the online platform, we needed cheap internet. So we created a data bundle that would be a quarter the cost of the data bundles that were being sold by Safaricom. And they told us, oh no, they'll be watching Netflix and YouTube. We said, not really. The same way you can blacklist a website, you can't go to this pornographic website. You can whitelist websites. You can say, these are the only websites that you can go to. And so we started whitelisting websites like Wikipedia, Strathmore.edu, Zoom.com. We just whitelisted the ones relevant to education, created this package in collaboration with Safaricom, and rolled it out for the use of everyone in the country, not just Strathmore. So I'm telling you all this just to let you know how much Strathmore tries to use the knowledge that we have here to serve our country. And now we have the privilege to serve our continent as well. I'm so pleased that you're here, Secretary General, and we really want to promote trade in Africa. That will help all these different economies to grow and then to provide the much needed services that the respective countries need. And we are happy to provide our expertise in technology to make that possible. So I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us today as our President launches this summit and launches this very important discussion that we have. We enjoy the partnership that we have with you. We could never do it alone. The reason you come to a university is because it's a trusted space. It is an institution that simply wants the truth to be known, to be understood, to be leveraged for progress. We have no political agenda, no any other agenda you might think of, except to just advance the cause of progress and science and humanity. And so that's why you come to us. We're a hub where we bring together government and industry and communities. And you play your part in whichever way it is by helping us tap into your knowledge, tap into your expertise, the resources that you can give us to make all these ambitious projects become a reality. So thank you very much for your presence here today, and I welcome you all very warmly to Strathmore University.
Next, I'll call His Excellency Wamkele Mene, the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretary General. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Master of Ceremonies, Your Excellency President Ruto, Cabinet Secretary, Your Honor, Vice Chancellor of the University, the senior leadership of the university, private sector, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, Excellencies, High Commissioners and Ambassadors. I want to also recognize High Commissioner of Kenya to Ghana, High Commissioner Marine, who's here with us. I'm most grateful to be here today because of what Professor said, and that is that universities are at the heartthrob of societal critiquing and advancing societies. And in particular today, the focus is on digitization and how we can ensure advancement of our continent, deploying digital tools and enhancing our digital skills to boost intra-Africa trade. And allow me a few minutes to just set out to you what we have done in the AFCFTA Secretariat and what we will continue to do to deploy digital skills to accelerate the integration of our continent. In May 1963, our founding mothers and fathers met in the historic city of Addis Ababa. And the principal objective, of course, at that time was to defeat colonialism, push back colonialists. And as I always say, with the defeat of apartheid in South Africa, our founding mothers and fathers arguably achieved their objective, except one. And that is the integration of our continent. And so if you review the founding instruments of the Organization of African Unity, they say Africa must establish a single payment system, that Africa must establish an integrated market. This is in May 1963. And so under the leadership of our heads of states and government, we are beginning to put into action those founding objectives of the Organization of African Unity. And what is interesting is, as far back as May 1963, our founding fathers and mothers said, we have a continent that has 42 currencies. How do we make sure that we trade? As we speak, in order to trade, if you are in Kenya, you want to trade with somebody in Ghana, where I live, you have to buy a third currency. So we trade amongst one another using a third currency, and the cost, or currencies, and the cost we estimate it to be close to $5 billion annually. So what we have done, working with Afrexim Bank, under the leadership of Professor Orama, is to introduce to our heads of states and government the payments and Pan-African payments and settlement system to enable digital payments in local currency. Wherever you are on the African continent, you trade in your own currency. This is a significant step forward in digital innovation, in ensuring that we deploy digital skills and tools for inclusive trade. The majority of beneficiaries of the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System are small and medium enterprises and young entrepreneurs who cannot afford the cost associated with currency convertibility. This is a very important development in the history of our continent that resonates, as I say, with the founding objectives of the Organization of African Unity. It is, of course, a matter of regret that it has taken us this far to advance on some of those long-standing objectives. The second observation, again in respect of digitization and digital tools, the ministers of trade are currently negotiating a protocol on digital trade. That protocol on digital trade will provide the regulatory framework, the legal framework, the market access for digitization of the African continent, as well as establish the requisite digital infrastructure to ensure that the millions and millions and millions of young Africans who are at the cutting edge of digital innovation, that there's a platform to support their work. I hope by the end of the year, the Ministers of Trade will conclude negotiations of this protocol, and then we present it to our heads of states and government in February next year for them to adopt it, and we begin to implement the protocol. And some of the features of the protocol include payments, data flows, so that data can flow, can be processed, managed, and moved around the African continent. It is estimated that Africa by the year 2035 will require 700 data centers. And those data centers must be located throughout the African continent so that we spread the benefits. More and more young Africans are trained as software engineers, and we transition Africa's economy completely to become a digital economy, as is predicted, where we deploy and aggressively implement the protocol on digital trade. And so Africa has an opportunity. We have a very, very unique opportunity in accelerating digitization. I was saying the other day that there is no reason why Africa cannot be as competitive or even more than Dublin on data centers, on management of data, and flows of data. This is the lifeline of our continent going forward. And so the mandate and what we are launching today under the leadership of His Excellency the President entirely resonate and is consistent with not just the objectives of the AFCFTA, but the long-standing objectives of the Organization of African Unity. The third point that I would mention, again in respect of digitization and trade. President, I was invited by Frank, the former CEO of Trademark Africa, then it was called Trademark East Africa, to visit the port of Mombasa. And what I saw was remarkable, how the East African community and Kenya, in terms of innovation for custom systems. You could be at the port and there is a digital center that tells you how many trucks are coming in, how many trucks are leaving the port, improving the efficiency to a very, very large extent. Now, if we look at across the African continent, the reality is that the story is not the same. So we have to rely on Kenya and the EAC to lead in the area of custom systems digitization. There are some parts of the continent where there is a one-stop border post. The immigration officials, the customs officials are seated next to each other. but the pile of paperwork is this high. And that is because of lack of interoperability of systems, lack of digitization of systems to enable more efficient trade. And so we have a very ambitious project to introduce digitization of custom systems, modeling on what has been achieved here in Kenya and the East African community. Here, I was told when I visited the port, 15 years ago, it used to take from the port of Mombasa to Kigali, Rwanda, it would take 15 days or 14 days. And today it takes 2 or 3 days for those goods to be cleared and to arrive in Kigali, Rwanda, one stamp, a very, very efficient system. So the model of digitization that you have developed certainly is a model that we should be rolling out throughout the rest of the continent. In West Africa, Abidjan-Lagos trade corridor, the distance is 1,000 kilometers, 1,080 kilometers. It takes 15 days and 37 checkpoints for goods to move 1,000 kilometers. Clearly, there is a need to improve our trade corridors, looking at the success stories that have already taken place across the African continent. And so we look forward to working with you as a university, as thinkers, as research, to help us in the innovation of digitization of trade. I'm just a trade lawyer. I know nothing about digitization, so we require your expertise to help us to advance. Let me close on this note. I mentioned 1963 May, the history of the Organization of African Unity and what was foresaw. Last week, some of you may have seen an article in the New York Times, and it was entitled, "The World is Becoming More African." And so the New York Times tells us something that some of us already knew anyway, but tells us that by the year 2050, Africa's combined GDP is estimated to be 16.2 trillion United States dollars. And that by 2050, the turn of the century, the largest working force in the world will be in Africa. And third, that the youngest population in the world will be here on the African continent. But these positive projections will remain nothing but that if we do not move aggressively to integrate our continent, to integrate the market, to become more globally competitive, and to ensure that we create opportunities for young Africans here. And so I am most grateful the leadership of the African Union, His Excellency President Ruto. Every time he speaks, he mentions the AFCFTA. We were here a few months ago during the session of the American and Kenya Chamber of Commerce Summit, and we listened very, very carefully to the vision that the President has in engaging the private sector to work together to create opportunities here on the African continent. So I want to thank all of you very much for your attention, and I wish all of us good deliberations over the next day or two. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency Wamkele Mene. At this point, allow me to now welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Trade, Investment and Industry, Madam Rebecca Miano, who will in turn invite His Excellency. Why don't we welcome her with a clap? Welcome, Madam Rebecca.
Your Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Before I invite His Excellency to speak, I'll just share with you very paradoxical data that paints Africa where we are and how digital trade will close these gaps. We all know that Africa's percentage of global population is 17%. And Africa's percentage of global landmass is 20%. Africa's percentage of global arable land is 65%. Africa's percentage of global renewable fresh water is 10%. And Africa's percentage of global natural resources and minerals, including renewable energy, is 30%. That's the Africa we are talking about. But Africa's percentage of global GDP is only 2.8%. Africa's percentage of global trade, just 3%. Africa's percentage of global passenger traffic is another 2.4%. Africa's percentage of global manufacturing is another 2.8%. Africa's percentage of global energy consumption, just about 3%. And finally, Africa's percentage of global food supply is just about 8%. And therefore, the discussions that we are having today, the discussions on research and innovation and digital trade, will go a long way in closing these gaps and moving from the 2%, the 1%, to double-digit percentages. And I do believe, truly believe, that the discussions that are going on here, and even together with the Secretary General, will pay dividend very, very soon. I want to congratulate Strathmore University for all the work that they are doing. And I am very happy to note that the AFC-FTA is soon concluding the protocol on digital trade, and that will be catalytic in improving the figures that I have given. Your Excellency, as I welcome you, I want to inform you that the brains in this room can easily resolve and sort out and blow out all the problems we have in Africa. It's now my pleasure, my singular pleasure, to invite His Excellency to address this gathering. Karibu sana, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much, everybody. Let's take our seats. The Vice Chancellor of this great university, Dr. Ogutu, and the university leadership, Excellencies, honorable members present, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I want to thank each and every one of you for finding time to participate in this inaugural conference on Africa Continental Free Trade Area and engage with the most important fundamental issues in terms of Africa's overdue economic transformation. We are at a historic juncture in world development in which Africa, at long last, is emerging as a focal point of important global strategic discourse with tremendous political, security, environmental, and most importantly, economic implications. Throughout the modern age, Africa has been profiled as a troubled continent which abounds with immense potential, limitless possibilities, but year after year, overcoming these challenges and actualizing potential has remained a very elusive target. Consequently, Africa has continued to rank unfavorably when it comes to participating, contributing, and competing in the global economic space relative to other regions. As Minister Miano has said, Africa only accounts for 3% of global trade because a stronger performance is prevented by disjointed and fragmented markets. Besides other structural deficiencies and historical legacies which undermine sound institutional development, impede efficiency, and limit the possibility of robust economic growth and transformation. Historically, the continent has been afflicted by colonial tyranny, economic exploitation, and political instability, which have hindered Africa's ability to participate fully in global trade and benefit from its own resources. Although politically sovereign, economically we have been trapped in a vicious cycle of underdevelopment and want, now compounded by a huge debt trap and a runaway climate crisis. The profile of Africa has been so pessimistic that its endowments were deliberately cast in despairing light. Africa's resources were portrayed as a curse that would only bring conflict and bloodshed instead of wealth and progress. Africa's growing youthful population was similarly represented as a ticking time bomb that would explode into intense poverty and endless fighting. Even Africa's forests and other resources were not spared. Despite an indeed very often, because of its abundant endowments, Africa has been persistently underrated, underrepresented, and relegated to the margins of economic discourse while being at the center of negative political conversation. These conversations are changing, and I'm very happy that we are changing the narrative about Africa. And the narrative is changing because we have learned to tell our story as Africans. Much of the difficulty encountered by many countries arose from international economic and financial system configured to sustain a rigid development pathway. Consequently, resources typically flew in one direction, on the cheap, to the benefit of the powerful industrialized nations, which control the levers of the system today, while finished products are afterwards imported to these same countries in our continent at a price that make utter mockery of our endowments, our aspirations, and our progress. At the center of all discourse concerning Africa's relative underdevelopment and low economic performance, in the midst of such staggering plenty, is the question: why is a continent that is larger than all other continents and land masses combined, which is home to over 1 billion and a bit people and sits at all these resources, contributing only 3% of global trade and only 2.8% of global GDP? That is the question we need to answer, and that is the question we've been working hard to answer, and this is the question we need Strathmore and the center that's going to be set up here to help us answer. As soon as one reflects upon this question, it becomes clear that there exists a connection between Africa's underperformance in absolute and comparative terms and the equally low levels of intra-Africa trade and investment. Let me give you examples. Between 1995 and 2017, intra-African trade grew from 10% to 17%. That is a period of 22 years. For perspective, consider that the next lowest region in regional trade is North America at 31%, then Asia at 59%, while Europe stands at 69, almost 70%. There lies the issue. We speak about EAC because, and that's what Michaela here was referring to, we have tried to tear down the barriers to East African trade. And that is why today EAC, intra-EAC trade within the countries in EAC is at about 27%, the highest in the continent of Africa. But compared to where other regions are, you can see that we have so much ground to cover. The EU is a highly integrated market with a parliament, judiciary, and a single currency. And this unity is amply reflected by its GDP and levels of